You know, it's a most curious thing that each of us walks around assuming we are a sort of solid, separate entity, an isolated bubble of consciousness peering out from behind the eyes. And yet, the more closely we look for this self, the more it slips through our fingers like water. We spend our lives defending it, polishing it, promoting it, worrying about it, and all the while, never quite noticing that the very thing we're protecting may be nothing more than a marvelous illusion. So let us explore this strange creature we call I, and see what remains when we stop trying so hard to be someone. We usually imagine the self as something fixed, an inner captain steering the ship, but if you observe your own mind carefully, you will notice that the self is not a thing at all. It is more like a whisper of continuity, a gentle thread woven out of memories, habits, and expectations. From childhood onward we collect impressions, our name, our face in a mirror, the way people respond to us, and we begin to assemble them into a kind of inner portrait. Over time, this portrait becomes so familiar that we forget it was ever painted. It appears solid, stable, something we can point to and say, yes, this is who I am. Yet if you try to grasp it directly, to locate the exact place where you reside, it slips away as though it were made of mist. What we call the self is not a single thing but a process. It is a stream of experiences that the mind bundles together into a coherent narrative. You remember your past, and you project your future, and between these two bookends you construct the story of a unified person who supposedly stands behind everything you do. But memories do not prove the existence of a fixed self. They are simply impressions, recordings of what has happened, and they arise and fade like any other mental event. A photograph of you from 10 years ago is not you, and neither is the memory of that moment. It is merely evidence that something occurred, not proof of a solid person who continued unchanged from then until now. Thoughts behave in much the same way. They spring into consciousness uninvited, like bubbles rising from the depths of a pond. If you watch carefully, you will notice that you do not choose your thoughts. They appear, and then you become aware of them. Sometimes you like them, sometimes you dislike them, sometimes you wish they would go away, but at no point do you truly control them. And yet, the mind claims authorship. I thought that, I decided that. This is the narrative function at work, stitching together unrelated mental events and calling them the deliberate creations of a single entity. This inner storyteller is remarkably persuasive. It gives you the sense of being a thinker behind the thoughts, a feeler behind the feelings, a door behind the actions. But when you look for that inner agent, the supposed captain at the helm, you find nothing but more thoughts, more feelings, more sensations. There is no core, no solid center, no little person inside your head pulling levers. There is only the ongoing movement of experience. The self, then, is a convenience, a useful fiction. It helps us navigate the world, make plans, remember where we left our keys, and maintain a social identity. It allows us to use language like I and me, without descending into philosophical confusion every time we open our mouths. But its usefulness does not make it ultimately real. It is no more substantial than the profile you create on a social platform, a collection of preferences, images, and descriptions that give others a sense of who you are, but that never capture the living, changing flow of experience. If you notice this directly, the sense of solidity begins to loosen. The self becomes less like a stone and more like a song, something that is being played moment by moment, but that has no fixed form outside the music itself. You are not the character in the story, you are the awareness in which the story appears. And when this becomes clear, even for a moment, you begin to see that what you've been defending, protecting, and worrying about all these years is not a concrete entity at all, but a beautifully crafted illusion generated by the mind. The belief in a separate self leads naturally to the sensation of being an isolated ego, standing apart from the rest of the world. But this sense of separation is a trick of perspective, much like looking at the horizon and imagining a hard line dividing earth from sky. It appears real only because of the vantage point from which you are observing. When you look closely, really look, without relying on the habitual assumptions of the mind, you begin to see that the boundaries you take for granted are soft, permeable, and ultimately imaginary. You are not an island floating alone in the vast sea of existence. You are the sea itself, momentarily curling into the shape of a wave. We inherit the idea of separateness from the moment we learn to say, I. As children, we discover that the body we inhabit responds to our intentions, and so we conclude that we are its sole inhabitants. We learn to distinguish between me and not me, and the entire world is divided accordingly. But this division is not found in nature. A tree does not consider its roots as separate from the soil, nor does a river regard itself as separate from the rain that feeds it. Everything in nature moves in a continuous exchange. You breathe in the exhalations of trees and they breathe in yours. Your body is made of minerals that once resided in mountains, rivers, and ancient seas. The carbon in your cells was forged in the heart of stars that died billions of years ago. You are not just in the universe, you are the universe reshaping itself for a brief, miraculous moment. This is not a poetic exaggeration, it is a simple observation of how things actually are. Every boundary you perceive, your skin, your name, your identity, is a convenient marker, but not an absolute truth. The skin, for instance, is often cited as the outer edge of the self, yet it is constantly exchanging heat, moisture, and particles with the surrounding environment. It is less a wall and more a membrane through which the world flows into you and you flow into the world. Even the air you consider outside enters you and becomes a part of your life process, only to be released again. Where, then, is the precise border between you and everything else? The mind creates the illusion of separateness by narrowing its attention. It focuses on the immediate experience of the body and interprets this as evidence of a stand-alone self. But this is like turning on a flashlight in the dark and assuming that the circle of light is the whole of reality. You see only what your attention illuminates. The rest, though unseen, is still there, supporting and sustaining you. If the mind could widen its lens even briefly, you would see that your life is intertwined with everything around you in ways far too intricate to unravel. This interconnectedness is not merely physical, it is also experiential. Emotions, thoughts, and moods arise not solely from within but from a complex interplay of relationships, social environments, cultural influences, and the subtle signals you pick up from others. When someone laughs, you feel lighter. When someone cries, something in you resonates. This shared emotional space shows that consciousness itself is not as self-contained as it appears. You are constantly influencing and being influenced, like ripples spreading across the surface of a pond. To believe in a separate self is to overlook this vast web of interdependence. It is like looking at a single leaf and forgetting the tree to which it belongs. When you see yourself clearly, without the distortions of habitual thought, the sense of isolation begins to dissolve. You recognize that the boundaries dividing self from other, mind from world, are creative conveniences, not ultimate truths. And in that recognition, life becomes less a struggle of survival and more a graceful participation in the endless unfolding of the whole. The idea that we are in control, truly in command of our thoughts, our emotions, and the unfolding of our lives, is one of the most persistent illusions we cling to. It comforts us to imagine a little pilot inside the skull, a commander perched behind the eyes, choosing thoughts like items from a shelf and directing the body with deliberate precision. Yet if you watch your mind with even a hint of honesty, you'll see that thoughts do not arrive because you invited them. They appear on their own, unannounced, and often at the most inconvenient moments. A memory surfaces out of nowhere, a worry interrupts your quiet, a desire blooms suddenly, and you find yourself wondering, where did that come from? You didn't summon it, it simply arose, the way clouds drift into the sky or waves swell in the ocean. This spontaneous arising is the natural movement of the mind, but the narrative voice claims ownership. I thought this, I decided that, I made this happen. This sense of authorship is like watching the wind ripple through a forest and assuming that a single leaf is orchestrating the dance. Yet we cling tightly to this illusion of control, because without it we fear we might dissolve into chaos. However, the truth is that control itself is the chaotic illusion, a kind of afterthought layered on top of the natural flow of experience. If you observe your impulses carefully, you'll notice that even your decisions emerge before you decide them. Neuroscientists have measured this, but you don't need machines to see it. Simply watch yourself the next time you make a choice. The urge arises first to move your hand, to speak a word, to make a plan. Only afterward does the mind jump in and declare, I did that. The commentary is late to the party, claiming responsibility for events that were already unfolding. The mind is not the author, it is the narrator. And the narrator is unreliable. It tells stories about free will, discipline, and personal power, believing itself to be the center of the universe. But in reality, your life is shaped by countless forces: your biology, your environment, your family, your culture, the weather, the time of day, the tone of someone's voice, the food you ate, the memories you carry, the strangers you encountered, and even events that happened long before you were born. These influences swirl together, creating the conditions from which your thoughts and actions arise. The idea that there is a single you controlling it all is as unrealistic as believing a lone drop of water directs the current of the entire river. Consider how often you find yourself doing things you didn't plan, humming a tune you just heard, reacting sharply when tired, laughing unexpectedly, feeling emotions triggered by a scent or a song. These moments reveal that the self is more of a participant than a controller. Life moves through you and the ego takes credit, but taking credit doesn't mean having control, any more than a shadow can claim responsibility for the body that casts it. Even the desire to gain control is itself uncontrollable. You don't choose to want power, the wanting arises. You don't select your preferences, your fears, or your attractions. They burst forth from the deep currents of your being. You are the witness of these currents, not their master. And yet, strangely, this lack of control is not a limitation but a liberation, because it reveals that life is not something you must push and pull into shape. It is something unfolding through you, with or without your permission. When this becomes clear even for a moment, the illusion of control begins to soften. The world no longer feels like something you must conquer. Instead, you start to notice the effortless way things happen when you stop trying to force them, the way life moves with its own intelligence, carrying you along like a leaf in a stream, held, supported, and part of a movement far larger than anything the isolated ego could imagine or manage. There is a curious shift that happens when you stop identifying with the contents of your mind and begin to notice the space in which those contents appear. For most of your life, you've been taught to believe that you are your thoughts, your emotions, your memories, and your sensations. You feel anger and say, "I am angry." You recall an event and say, "This is who I am." Yet if you look closely at your own experience, you'll see that everything you normally call me is constantly changing. Thoughts flash by like birds darting across the sky. Emotions swell like tides and then recede. Sensations arise in the body like ripples forming on a pond and vanish just as naturally. And still, something remains, something that does not come or go with each passing moment. That something is the aware presence in which all experiences unfold. You can notice it right now. A thought appears, and you know it appears. A sound arises and you hear it. A feeling comes and you sense it. The knowing itself is steady, unchanging, like an open field in which the weather shifts but the ground remains unmoved. You do not choose this awareness, it is already here before any thought of choosing arises. It is here before you remember your name and remains after any particular memory fades. It is not shaped by your successes or damaged by your failures. It is the silent witness that allows experience to appear at all. This awareness is not personal, though it is intimate. It does not have a face, a story, or a boundary. You cannot find where it begins or ends. It is simply the capacity to experience, the open space in which life shows itself. And yet most people overlook it, because they are enchanted by the contents that arise within it. They become preoccupied with the dramas of thought, the waves of emotion, the chatter of the inner narrative. They identify with the voice in the head rather than the silence that hears it. But the voice is never entirely reliable. It contradicts itself, changes over time, and often misleads you. Awareness, by contrast, never changes. It has always been exactly the same, from childhood to this very moment. Think back to your earliest memories. The details may be fuzzy, but the sense of being aware is the same now as it was then. The body has changed, the personality has changed, the beliefs and desires have changed, and yet the simple fact of being aware is identical. It has no age, it has no history, it does not grow wiser or more foolish. It is simply present, like an open window through which the world is seen. The view changes, but the window remains. When you begin to recognize that this presence is what you truly are, the contents of your experience lose their ability to define you. A thought can be troubling, but it is not you. An emotion can feel overwhelming, but it is not you. A sensation can be pleasant or painful, but it is not you. These events arise in the space of awareness like clouds forming in the sky. They are real in their moment, but they do not touch the sky itself. The sky does not become wet from the rain, nor does it cling to the clouds that pass through it. It simply holds everything effortlessly. You as awareness are the sky. The mind, with all its noise and movement, is the changing weather. To realize this is not to detach from life or withdraw from the world. It is to see clearly that the one who experiences is far deeper, quieter, and more expansive than anything that is experienced. And in seeing this, the grip of identification begins to loosen. Thoughts lose their authority, emotions lose their tyranny, and the sense of being trapped inside a limited self dissolves. What remains is simple, spacious presence, open, aware, and unburdened by the belief that you are anything less than the vastness in which all of life appears. When you begin to see that the self you've been carrying around is more of a story than a solid entity, something remarkable happens, not in a dramatic, thunderous way, but quietly, like a tight muscle finally letting go after years of holding tension. The freedom that emerges is not the freedom to become someone greater, wiser, or more successful. It is the freedom from the exhausting need to be someone at all. For so long you have lived inside the confines of an image, an idea of who you must be, who others think you are, who you fear you might become. And because you've mistaken this image for your true self, you've spent countless hours trying to protect it, improve it, justify it, or escape it. But once you see that this image is merely a mental construct, the pressure begins to dissipate like fog under sunlight. This does not mean that the personality vanishes or that life becomes an empty void. Rather, the weight of identification loosens. You no longer feel compelled to guard an imagined center, because you recognize there was never a fixed center to guard. Life becomes more fluid, more spontaneous, and strangely more natural. Decisions arise on their own without the burden of self-judgment. Actions unfold like chapters in a story being written moment by moment, not by a central author but by the total movement of life itself. You realize that you are not the actor struggling to play a role. You are the stage on which the entire play unfolds. The freedom that comes from this realization is not a freedom that must be earned. It is already present, waiting behind the walls of the mind's illusions. For years, you have believed that freedom was something to achieve through self-improvement, discipline, accomplishment, or spiritual attainment. But true freedom reveals itself only when you stop trying to become free. The very effort to achieve it reinforces the belief in a separate self who must strive, suffer, and struggle. When the illusion of that separate self is seen through, even briefly, you realize that the freedom you sought was never elsewhere. It was always the natural state of awareness itself. Open, unbounded, and untouched by the comings and goings of experience. People often fear that without the self, life would become meaningless or directionless. But the opposite is true. When the false self dissolves, you begin to move in harmony with life rather than in conflict with it. You are no longer torn between who you are and who you think you should be. You become like water flowing downhill, effortless. Challenges still arise, emotions still come and go, but they are no longer felt as personal burdens. They are simply waves on the surface of a vast ocean, and you are that ocean, not the temporary shapes it takes. With this shift, relationships also transform. When there is no rigid me to defend, there is no rigid other to defeat or impress. Interactions become more genuine, more compassionate, because they are no longer filtered through the lens of insecurity or self-preservation. You listen more deeply, speak more honestly, and connect more authentically. Not because you are trying to be a better person, but because the barriers between you and the world have thinned. You see yourself in others, not metaphorically, but in the simple realization that the same awareness looking through your eyes is looking through theirs. This freedom is not dramatic or loud, it is subtle, like a quiet smile that appears when you finally stop taking yourself so seriously. It is the relief of recognizing that life does not need your constant supervision to unfold correctly. It is the softening of a lifelong tension, the tension of pretending to be a solid separate self, and when this tension relaxes, what remains is a spaciousness that cannot be described, only lived. A simple, profound ease in being exactly what you already are, the open awareness in which all of life arises, dances, and disappears, without ever touching the stillness that is your true nature.